Come closer. I've got a story that starts the way the best ones do, with something falling, and someone who probably shouldn't have jumped after it. I'm Mabel, and tonight we're going back to Karenmore. The pack didn't know what they were chasing. That's the thing about wolves who hunt in groups. They stop looking at what's in front of them. They look at each other. They feed off the sound of their own paws hitting frozen ground, the rhythm of it, the certainty. A pack in full chase doesn't see prey anymore. It sees momentum. So no. They didn't look closely at the white wolf. They should have. The wolf was small for his age. That was the first thing Vesper noticed when she heard them coming. Not the pack, not the thunder of 12 sets of paws crossing the ridge above her. The white wolf running ahead of them. Small. Fast. But the kind of fast that comes from terror, not training. His gait was wrong. Left hind leg compensating for something. He'd been running for a while before she heard any of it. Vesper was sitting at the bottom of the Karenmore ravine when the sound reached her. She'd been there since mid-morning. The ravine was her place, not marked, not claimed, not worth anyone's time. A 30-foot drop off a limestone shelf, a narrow river running black and fast at the bottom, walls of rock that blocked the wind from every direction. She came here when she needed to think. Or when she needed to not think, which was more often. She heard the pack first. Then she looked up. The white wolf hit the edge of the shelf at full speed and didn't stop. Vesper was on her feet before she decided to move. She didn't think about the river. Didn't think about the drop. She thought about the angle of his trajectory and where he was going to land, and whether the rocks on the east bank were going to kill him faster than the water would. She shifted mid-jump. Her wolf form hit the river shallows 2 seconds after he did. The cold hit like a wall. The kind of cold that doesn't feel like temperature, it feels like a decision. She found him by sound first. Thrashing. Disoriented. The current was pulling him east toward the narrows where the rocks came up fast and close together. She got her body between him and the current. He bit her. Not hard. Instinct, not intent. The way any wolf bites when something grabs them in water. She felt his teeth on her shoulder and held her position anyway. Planted her paws, pushed back against the current until they hit the bank. He collapsed on the gravel. She stood over him, shaking water off her coat, breathing hard. The pack was still up on the ridge. She could hear them, circling the edge of the shelf, looking down, looking for a body. The river was loud enough here that they couldn't hear him breathing. After a moment, one of them made a sound. Low. Final. The sound a wolf makes when it's done with something. Then the paws retreated. North. Fast. They thought he was dead. Vesper looked down at the white wolf on the gravel bank. He was breathing. Barely. His left hind leg was worse than she'd thought, not a recent injury, something older that had never been set right. His ribs showed under wet fur. He was young. Younger than her. And she was 16 and already felt ancient. She shifted back, pulled her coat from the rock where she'd left it, and crouched beside him. He opened one eye. It was blue. The particular blue of glacier ice, pale and cold and startlingly clear. He growled at her. Right, you're welcome. She sat back on her heels and looked at the ridge. Empty now. The pack was gone, and the light was already dropping. The sun set early this far north in February, and the temperature would follow it down within the hour. She looked back at him. He was still watching her with that one open eye. Still growling, low and continuous, the way an animal growls when it's too hurt to do anything else, but wants you to know it hasn't given up. You can keep doing that, or you can let me look at the leg. Your choice. But I'm not sitting here in the cold while you decide. The growling stopped, not because he trusted her. She could tell that much. It stopped because he was too exhausted to maintain it. She took that as permission. The leg was bad. An old break that had healed crooked, the kind of injury that happens when there's no one around to set it. It wasn't going to kill him tonight, but it was going to keep slowing him down for the rest of his life if it stayed the way it was. She didn't say that out loud. She found 2 straight pieces of driftwood and tore a strip from the bottom of her shirt and splinted it clean. He made one sound when she straightened the angle. One sound, then nothing. Jaw locked, eyes fixed on some point past her shoulder. She wrapped the splint tight and sat back. He shifted then. Slow. Painful. The shift of someone who'd been holding the form too long. And then it wasn't a white wolf on the gravel bank. It was a boy. Brown hair, blue eyes, mud and blood and river water, and an expression that was working very hard to be something other than what it was. He was exactly her age, maybe younger. I didn't need your help. Vesper looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the river, then back at him. The river disagrees. He looked away. The muscle in his jaw moved. She pulled her coat off and dropped it on the gravel beside him. Not over him, beside him. Because draping it over him would have been a statement, and she didn't want to make statements. Then she went to gather wood for a fire before the last of the light was gone. He didn't say thank you. She didn't expect him to. But when she came back with the wood and got the fire started, he'd moved closer to it. Not close enough to be obvious. Just close enough to feel it. She didn't comment on that either. The fire crackled between them. Above the ravine, the wind was picking up. She could hear it moving across the ridge, cold and indifferent, the way Karenmore wind always was in February. Down here it couldn't reach them. He stared at the fire. She stared at the fire. Neither of them spoke. But he didn't leave, and she didn't tell him to. That was how it started. Not with words, not with decisions, just a fire at the bottom of a ravine and 2 wolves with nowhere else to go. 6 months. That's how long it took for the arrangement to stop feeling like an arrangement. I want you to think about what it means to spend 6 months with someone you never chose. No pack law brought them together. No alpha claimed either of them. Just 2 wolves at the bottom of a ravine who kept waking up in the same place, because the alternative was waking up alone. They never talked about it. That was the agreement that wasn't an agreement. You don't name a thing if naming it might make it go away. By August, the leg had healed straight. Not perfectly. There was still a slight hitch in his stride when he was tired. A hesitation on uneven ground that she'd learned to read without looking directly at him. She knew his patterns the way you know the patterns of weather, because she'd been paying attention for 6 months whether she meant to or not. His name was Ronan. She'd learned that in the 3rd week, when he said it without warning in the middle of eating, like he'd been deciding whether to tell her, and finally ran out of reasons not to. Flat, no ceremony. Ronan, like he was testing the weight of it out loud. Vesper. He nodded, went back to eating. That was the whole conversation. It was enough. They hunted separately at first, different hours, different directions, an unspoken division of the ravine's surrounding territory that kept them from crossing paths too often. Efficient, clean. The kind of system 2 people build when they're trying to share space without admitting they're sharing space. That ended in October. The deer had moved north earlier than usual. Something about the way the cold came down fast that year, pushing the herds ahead of it. The rabbits were still around but sparse, and 2 wolves eating only rabbits through a highland winter was a calculation that didn't work. They both knew it. Neither said it. One morning, she came back to the ravine empty-handed, and found him already there, also empty-handed, looking at the ridge with the specific expression he got when he was thinking through a problem, and hadn't found the answer yet. The deer moved. He didn't look at her. Flat. I know. We're going to need to go further north. The Black Fen Valley, maybe. There's a herd that winters there. That's Marrow pack territory. The northern edge isn't marked anymore. The markers rotted out 2 years ago. I checked. He looked at her then. That particular look. The one she'd catalogued without meaning to. The one that meant he was recalculating something. You checked. I check everything. A pause. Then. When do we leave? The hunt took 3 days. 3 days moving through terrain that belonged to someone else. sleeping in shifts, communicating mostly in the shorthand that 6 months of proximity had built between them. A look, a tilt of the head, the particular way she went still when she'd caught a scent worth following. He'd learned to read her the same way she'd read him. She noticed that too, and filed it away in the category of things she wasn't examining yet. They brought down a red deer on the second afternoon. Large. Enough to last them weeks if they cached it right in the cold. The problem was getting it back. They were 3 miles into Marrow territory when the wind shifted. Vesper felt it before she heard anything. A change in the air. Something underneath the cold that hadn't been there a moment ago. She dropped her end of the deer without explaining why. Shifted fast and low and put her nose into the wind. 4 wolves, maybe 5, coming from the west, moving at a pace that meant they hadn't caught the scent yet, but they would. She shifted back. Leave it. We're not leaving it. There are 5 of them. We're not leaving it, Vesper. The way he said her name. That was new. Not the name itself, no, but the weight he put on it. The specific frequency of it when he was digging in. Something's wrong. She'd noticed it happening more often lately, and she'd been very deliberately not noticing it. Then we move it faster than I thought possible, and we don't argue about it. He picked up his end, without another word. Behind your ear they ran. Not full sprinting. They had 3 miles of rough terrain, and 200 pounds of deer between them, and they both knew that burning out in the first quarter mile was how you got caught. Steady. Fast. The kind of pace that requires 2 people to be completely in sync, or it falls apart. They were in sync. She didn't think about that until later. They made it back to the ravine with the sound of the Marrow wolves still distant enough to be theoretical. Down the limestone shelf, him first with the bulk of the weight, her guiding the angle, and onto the gravel bank where the river noise covered everything. They dropped the deer, both of them breathing hard and standing close, closer than usual because the path down the shelf was narrow and neither of them had moved apart yet. She could feel the heat coming off him in the cold air. Could hear his heartbeat slowing from sprint pace back to something normal. You checked the markers. I told you I did. You checked them before winter. You were already planning this. I planned things. That's not a revelation. You planned it for both of us. She didn't answer that. It shouldn't be. Not because she didn't have an answer had to come. Because the answer was yes. And saying yes out loud meant admitting something about the last 6 months that she hadn't decided to admit yet. He was looking at her. She looked at the deer instead. We should cache half of it tonight before it freezes solid. A pause. Then, yeah. He didn't push it. She noticed that too. The way he'd learned when not to push. They were behind the past. Most wolves didn't learn that. Most wolves pushed until something broke and leave you. They worked through the evening in the near dark, cutting and caching in the rock shelf above the waterline. Shoulder to shoulder in the narrow space, not talking much. The fire she'd built earlier was still going, and the light of it reached them in the gap between the rocks, orange and warm against the black. At some point she became aware that they'd stopped working and were just sitting there. Back against the rock wall, sides almost touching. Watching the fire. She didn't remember when it happened. That was the problem with Ronan. Things happened gradually, and then suddenly and she always missed the exact moment of transition. Yes, it is. First winter. What? My mother used to say the first winter tells you who someone is. What they're willing to do when it gets bad enough. She thought about that. What did it tell you? He didn't answer right away. Looked at the fire for a long moment and not be swayed. That you check the markers before winter you cannot be. That you plan for 2, even when you're only responsible for 1. That when something's falling, you jump before you think about it. We'll be safe here. She said nothing. Oh. I know what it told you about me. You held your end of the deer for 3 miles in the dark. That's enough. Silence. The fire crackled. Somewhere above the ravine, the wind moved across the ridge, cold and steady. He said her name once, not asking anything. You are not starting a sentence. Drop your weapon. Just surrender. Vesper. The way you say a word when you're learning the shape of it in your mouth. She didn't answer, but she didn't move away either. And in Karenmore, in February, with a Marrow pack 3 miles north and a cached deer in the rocks and a fire that was going to need more wood before morning, that was the closest either of them came to saying it. You are 3 years changes a person, not all at once, not in ways you can point to on a single day and say, there, that's when it happened. It's the accumulation. The 1,000 small decisions that calcify into something permanent without you noticing until one morning you wake up and the person you were at 16 is someone you remember but wouldn't recognize in a mirror. Jesse here as well not still watching. Ronan was 19 now. So was Vesper. And the ravine that had been a hiding place had become something neither of them had a word for. I saw it, not a home. Home implied roots, implied permanence, implied a future you'd decided on. They hadn't decided on anything. They just kept being there. That was its own kind of decision. She knew that. She just hadn't said it out loud yet. It was a Tuesday in late September when the Fenrath pack found them. Vesper smelled them first. 7 wolves moving in loose formation through the eastern tree line, not hunting, not running after a walk time, the deliberate pace of a pack that knows it's in its own territory and isn't in any hurry to prove it. Except this wasn't Fenrath territory. It was the unmarked buffer between 3 packs' edges, the kind of ground that belonged to nobody, which meant it belonged to whoever was standing on it at the time. She and Ronan were standing on it. She touched his arm once. He'd already scented them. His posture had changed in that particular way. Shoulders back, chin level, the stillness that wasn't relaxation but its opposite. They waited. The Fenrath pack emerged from the tree line with their alpha at the front. Broad, mid-30s. The kind of man who'd been large his whole life and had learned to use it as a first language. He looked at the two of them with the flat assessment of someone doing a calculation, and whatever the calculation was, he reached the answer quickly. His eyes went to Vesper. Rogue wolves this far into the buffer. Didn't think anyone still ran without a pack in these hills. Vesper said nothing. Ronan said nothing. The alpha's mouth moved into something adjacent to a smile. He was still looking at Vesper. We're expanding our range north. Could use wolves who know this terrain. The offer's open, particularly for a she-wolf with your tracking record. I've heard about the pair that hunts the Karenmore ravine. Everyone has. A pause. I know. His eyes moved to Ronan briefly. The kind of glance you give a piece of furniture you're deciding whether to keep. Which you Your beta can come too, of course. The word landed. Beta. Vesper felt Ronan go still beside her. Not the alert stillness from before name. Something different. Something that pulled tight like a bowstring finding full draw. She spoke before he could. We're not interested. The alpha's eyes came back to her. Something shifted in them. Not offense, not yet. Reassessment. The offer's a good one. Protection, territory, resources. Whatever you've been doing out here, it's not sustainable long-term. You both know that. Something is wrong. We know our terrain better than you know your own. That's not something we're looking to trade. What is it? A beat, if you learn. The alpha studied her. Behind him, his pack had spread slightly. Not aggressive, just present. Making sure the number was felt. Then he looked at Ronan again. Your beta doesn't speak for himself. Ronan's voice came out controlled, too controlled. The specific register he used when the alternative was something he'd decided against. I'm not her beta, you are still. The alpha tilted his head. Then what are you? Silence. They waited 3 years. It stretched 3 seconds by the river. 4. The kind of silence that has weight, that everyone present can feel pressing down on the moment. Ronan said nothing. Beak. The alpha smiled, for genuine this time, which was worse somehow. That's all right, it can be. He dipped his head to Vesper in something that was almost a bow, just mocking enough to register. The offer stands. You change your mind. You know where our border markers are. Then they were gone. Back into the tree line. Moving south. The sound of them faded quickly. Vesper stood very still. Ronan hadn't moved. She turned to look at him. His jaw was set. His eyes were on the tree line where the Fenrath pack had disappeared, and the expression on his face was the one she'd learned to read as the outer layer of something that went considerably deeper had remains. She said, "Remain still. You should have let me handle it." "You did handle it, you that once. You almost didn't let me." He turned his head, looked at her directly. He said, "You were the one worth keeping. Like I was." Stops. "Like you were what?" He didn't finish it. Looked away. "That's what bothered you. Not the offer, not the territory. That he looked at me, and looked through you." The muscle in his jaw moved. "It bothered me because he was wrong." She studied him for a moment. The set of his shoulders, the way he was holding himself together with the specific effort of someone who'd decided not to say the thing they were actually thinking. "Ronan." He looked at her. "You refused before I could. You answered for both of us before he finished talking, Dunridge. I know. You're not my alpha. No, you're not my pack. You've never been either of those things, sir. I know that." "Then what are you doing? Step aside, child." The question sat between them. She hadn't planned to ask it. It came out with the momentum of 3 years of not asking it, and now it was there, and neither of them could pretend it wasn't. He held her eyes. Though, for a long moment he just looked at her, and she could see the thing he wasn't saying, moving behind his expression like weather behind glass. "Prepare yourself." Then he said, "I don't know." She should have left it there, should have nodded and moved on and filed it away with all the other things she wasn't examining yet. She didn't. "Yes, you do, it's clear." His breath came out slow. "I know." He looked at the ground for a moment, then back at her. And then he didn't say anything at all. He crossed the 2 feet between them, and his hand came up and his thumb pressed against her jaw, not pulling her anywhere, not asking for anything. Just there. Warm against the cold air. She didn't move. His forehead dropped to hers. They stood like that for a moment that had no particular length, too short and too long at the same time, the way those moments always are. Then she stepped back. Not because she wanted to. He could tell, so that much. She could tell that he could tell. "We should get back before dark," He let his hand fall. "Yeah." They walked back to the ravine without touching, without talking. The sun was dropping behind the western ridge, pulling the last of the warmth out of the air, and the wind was starting up the way it always did at dusk in Karenmore. Low and steady, carrying the smell of coming rain. "You were born of the..." She didn't look at him. He didn't look at her, I hear. But when they reached the ravine, and she went to start the fire, he was right beside her, shoulder almost touching hers, the way he always was. And she didn't move away. That was the thing neither of them said out loud yet, that no matter how many times she stepped back, she never actually went anywhere. Neither did he. It started before dawn. "I see, Heir." Vesper woke to the sound of him breathing wrong. "I'm sorry, boys." Not the slow rhythm she'd learned over 3 years of sleeping 6 feet apart. The rhythm she could read in her sleep. Literally, the way you read weather. This was different. Shallow. Controlled in the specific way that means someone is working to keep it controlled through the northern. She was up before she was fully awake. Trained. He was sitting against the far wall of the shelter for the overhang they'd built into the rock face above the ravine. 3 years of incremental improvement until it kept out the wind and most of the rain. "Knees up," he told me. "Head back against the stone. Eyes open, soul-bound." Ronan whispers, "It's fine." I to the heart. "Go back to sleep, Paul." She crossed the shelter in 4 steps and crouched in front of him. "He left 3 years. Where?" She caught a pause. Then he tilted his head left. Just slightly, seeing what needs. She reached out before he could object, pushed his hair back from behind his left ear. "There is no other path," and stopped. The mark was roughly the size of her thumb, face of ending. Geometric, things, not rough like a scar, not organic like a birthmark. Precise. The lines of it were gold against his skin, deep gold, the kind of color that didn't exist in nature. It was still forming, she could see the edges of it moving, slow and deliberate. The way frost forms on glass, spreading a millimeter at a time. She'd seen that symbol once in her life. She'd been 12 years old, running the southern edge of Karenmore on a dare from herself, And she'd found a boundary stone half buried in the hillside. I saw it. Old. Older than any marker she'd seen before. Carved into it were two things: a territorial warning in the old script that she couldn't fully read, and a symbol. Geometric. Precise. She'd memorized it the way you memorize things that feel important before you know why. She was looking at it now. On the skin behind Ronan's left ear, burning itself into existence in the dark before dawn, 19 years late. She sat back on her heels. He was watching her face. What is it? Not a question. He could read her too. 3 years cut both ways. You are quiet. How long has it been hurting? Since yesterday. It started as heat. Just, thank you. Warmth here. I thought I'd caught something. Saw him die. Slept wrong. And there's nothing I can. Then it got worse through the night. She said nothing. Vesper. What is it? She stood up, went to the entrance of the shelter, and looked out at the ravine below. The river was dark in the pre-dawn, running fast with the recent rain. The fire had burned down to coals. I understand. Have you ever heard of a lineage mark? Give you a pause. He processed this carefully. The voice of someone who already sees where the path is going, and isn't sure they want to arrive. I've heard of them. Old families. Alpha bloodlines going back far enough that the bond leaves a physical mark on the heir when they come of age. Those are for recognized heirs, legitimate ones. She turned around. Bastards from strong enough bloodlines mark late. The lineage doesn't care about the paperwork. It just takes longer to find its way through. He stared at her. I need you to think. Your mother. Where was she from? What did she tell you about your father? Nothing. She told me nothing except to stay away from the north. And you came north. I came north. She crossed back to him, crouched down again. Made herself look at the mark directly. Made herself be clinical about it. The way she was clinical about injuries, about weather, about threats, about observation first, feeling later. The symbol was almost fully formed now. It would finish by morning. There's only one lineage in the Northern Highlands that uses this mark here. I saw it on a boundary stone when I was 12. The stone was old. Centuries old, what this means. This symbol has been on Ashvale territory markers since before anyone alive can remember. She felt him go still, half as clear. Ashvale. Aldis Ashvale. Lykan King. 3 territories, 11 bloodlines, 40 years of consolidated rule. A long silence. That's not possible. The mark disagrees. He stood up. Time has come. She stood with him. Stay focused. He moved to the shelter entrance and stood where she'd stood a moment ago, looking out at the ravine. She watched his back, the set of his shoulders, the way he was holding everything together with the particular effort she'd learned to recognize. The effort of someone rewriting a story they'd already memorized. She knew. His mother. She knew, and she didn't tell him. She said stay away from the north, and she took that secret with her when she died and left him 2 years alone with a name that meant nothing before he'd understood what it might mean. Maybe she was protecting you. From what? She didn't answer that, because the answer was obvious, and saying it out loud wouldn't help either of them right now. From him. From the weight of it. From exactly this moment. Standing at the edge of a ravine at dawn with a king's mark burning itself into your skin and no map for what comes next. He turned around. His face was not blank. She knew his blank ahead. Don't miss. This was different. This was the expression underneath blank, the one that only appeared when something had hit hard enough to get through all the layers he'd built. Nothing's changed. She looked at him. He said it again, more deliberate. Nothing has changed. This changes nothing. Ronan. We don't know that he even knows I exist. We don't know that this mark means anything to anyone except it means everything. You know it does. He crossed the shelter in 3 steps and stopped in front of her. Close, the same 2 feet he'd crossed in September. The same distance that kept collapsing between them, no matter how many times she rebuilt it. I'm not leaving. I didn't ask you to. I know what you're thinking. You really don't. You're thinking that this changes what I am. That there is a version of this where I walk into Ashvale territory and claim something, and you stay here, and that's not what I want. She held his eyes. What do you want? He looked at her for a long moment. The mark behind his ear had stopped moving. She could tell from the way the faint light of it had steadied. Fully formed now, permanent ahead of us. You. This asked. Whatever this is. I don't care about bloodlines. I don't care about territories or kings or any of it. I care about... He stopped himself. Looked at the ground for a moment, then back at her. All this time, I jumped into the river after you once. That means only that. You jumped into the river after the end of all we knew. What? The second week. You were checking the eastern bank in form, and the current took you. That's the hiker. You didn't call out. You just handled it. But I was already in the water before you surfaced. She stared at him. You never told me that. You never needed to know. The shelter was quiet. Outside, the first gray light of dawn was beginning to separate the sky from the ridge. The river ran below them, steady and indifferent. Somewhere up on the moor, a bird called once and went silent. She reached up. Her fingers found the mark behind his ear, not the way she'd touched it before, clinically, observing. Different. Her thumb traced the edge of it as here. He went very still, the ridge. It's going to find us, as to whatever this means. Whoever he is, it's going to find us. I know. We should be ready. I know. She dropped her hand, stepped back, looked at him in the early light. The boy she'd pulled out of a river at 16, standing in front of her 3 years later, with a king's mark behind his ear and that expression on his face that she'd spent 3 years cataloging and had never fully translated until now. She understood it now. She'd always understood it. Don't say nothing's changed. Why? Because everything has. And I need you to know that I know that, and that I'm still here anyway. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The same gesture, mirrored, deliberate. Yeah, that was all. It was enough. He came alone. That was the first thing Vesper noticed. No escort, no formation now, no advance wolves clearing the terrain ahead of him. It's hot. Just one man moving through the Karenmore Valley at dawn with the particular stillness of someone who hasn't needed protection in a very long time. She'd smelled him before she saw him. The scent hit her from the west, something old and heavy, like stone after rain, like the particular cold that lives inside mountains rather than on their surface. Nothing she had a name for. Nothing like any wolf she'd encountered in 3 years of running this territory. She was on the ridge above the ravine when he appeared in the valley below. Jesse here at every entry, and I need you to understand something about this moment. Hidden walls. Vesper had been waiting for it. Since the morning the mark finished forming, since she'd stood in the shelter doorway watching the sun come up over Karenmore, and understood that something had shifted in the world that couldn't be shifted back. She'd been waiting, planning, running scenarios the way she ran terrain, looking for the angles, the exits, the places where things could go wrong. What she hadn't planned for was this, one man, no army. Walking toward them like he had all the time in the world. She came down from the ridge and met him at the edge of the ravine. He stopped when he saw her, took her in with the flat assessment of someone who misses nothing. Her age, her rank, her lack of pack markings, the way she was standing between him and the path down to the shelter. All of it registered in about 2 seconds. Then, where is he? Not a question. Vesper held her ground. Who are you looking for? He looked at her for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes, not irritation, not quite. Recalculation. You know who I'm looking for. You've known I was coming since the mark set. The fact that you're standing here instead of running tells me you're either very brave or very stupid. He paused. You don't look stupid. He's not here. You're late. The lie landed flat as we could look. He knew it. She knew he knew it. I am aware. She held his eyes anyway up. Tell me what he was. Large was the wrong word. Presence was closer. The kind of man who made the space around him feel smaller without moving into it. Silver-gray hair, long, catching the morning wind. Eyes the particular blue of deep water, pale, cold, and completely still. Scars on his face that had settled into the skin like they'd always been there. He didn't raise his voice. I tracked the mark for 11 days across 4 territories. I've been moving since before the sun came up. And you're standing between me and my son with a look on your face that says you'll keep standing there regardless of what I do. A beat. So I'm going to ask you one more time. Not because I need your permission. Because how you answer tells me something I need to know and do this. His eyes didn't move from hers. He knew that. Where is he? I'll begin. She held it for 3 full seconds. Then, the storm behind me. Down the shelf. He knows you're here, and the rider at dawn. Aldis looked at her for a moment longer. Dawn come. Then he looked at the path down to the ravine. How long? 3 years. He was 16. So was I. Something shifted in his face. Not softening. Aldis Ashvale didn't soften. But something adjusted. The way a calculation adjusts when a new variable enters it. Step aside. She did. She didn't follow him down. She stayed on the ridge and listened to the sound of his boots on the limestone shelf, steady, unhurried, and then silence as he reached the gravel bank below. She counted her own heartbeats, got to 47 before she heard Ronan's voice at the edge. She couldn't make out words. The river took them, but she knew the register. Controlled. Too controlled. The specific frequency of someone who has rehearsed this moment 10,000 times and is discovering that none of the rehearsals were right. She didn't go down. This wasn't hers. She didn't know how long it lasted. Long enough for the sun to clear the eastern ridge and start burning the mist off the valley floor. Long enough for a pair of ravens to land on the limestone shelf above the ravine and leave again, bored. When Aldis came back up, he came alone. He stopped 2 feet from her, looked out at the valley for a moment. Then, he said, you pulled him out of the river. The current was taking him toward the narrows. He said you splinted the leg. It was a bad break. Old. It would have kept causing problems. A pause. He also said, you've been feeding the both of you for 3 years on terrain you mapped before winter each year. That you knew the Marrow markers had rotted and used that to extend your hunting range north. That when the Fenrath pack found you, you turned down incorporation without hesitating. She said nothing. He was very thorough. Something in his voice on that last sentence. Not warmth exactly, but the place where warmth had been recently, still faintly visible the way heat stays in stone after the fire goes out. What did you tell him? Aldis looked at the valley again. I've learned that he has a great deal to learn about what it means to hold a territory, and that the life he's been living out here is not the life that's waiting for him. That there are people who have been waiting for an heir for 19 years, and they are not patient people. It's a pause. And that his mother loved him. In her way, the beginning of the next. Vesper said nothing. He turned to look at her directly. For us. He wants you to come. To Ashvale. Yes. As what? Aldis held her gaze. The wind moved between them, cold and steady, carrying the smell of the moor and the distant heather and the particular cold that lived inside this valley and nowhere else. That depends on him, and on you, again, and on whether either of you have the sense to say out loud what's been obvious to everyone within scenting distance for the last 3 years. She felt her jaw tighten. I'm not offering charity. I'm not offering protection. I have a son who is going to inherit 3 territories and 11 bloodlines, and who has spent the last 3 years learning to survive in the wilderness, with a she-wolf who checks the territory markers before winter and jumps into rivers before she thinks about it. He paused. That's not nothing. That's not something I throw away. She looked at him for a long moment. Yeah, he doesn't need my permission to go. And no, B, he needs yours to stay. Duh. She went down alone. He was sitting on the gravel bank where she'd found him 3 years ago, in almost the same position. Back against the rock wall, knees up. He looked up when he heard her on the shelf. She sat down beside him, not close enough to be obvious, just close enough to feel it. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then, "He's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Something worse. He came alone. I noticed that." A pause. "He wants me to come back with him. To Ashvale. There are people, advisors, council members, a whole structure that's been waiting for an heir." He said it like he was describing a problem he needed help solving, not like he was. He stopped, not like he was asking. Was he? Ronan looked at the river. "I think so. In his way." She thought about the man on the ridge, the way something had adjusted in his face when she told him how long, the way his voice had sounded. He was very thorough. "What do you want to do?" He speaks. He turned his head, looked at her. Then she held his eyes and didn't look away, and didn't make it easy for him because she never made things easy, and he knew that, and stayed anyway. "I want to go, and I want you to come with me. And I know I don't have the right to ask that, and I'm asking anyway, because apparently that's what I do. You jumped into a river for me before you knew my name. Yeah. You held 3 miles of deer through Marrow territory in the dark. Yeah. You turned down a pack when the Alpha called you my beta. That one was selfish. I know. I didn't say it wasn't." He looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the shape of one. The thing that happened on his face just before. "I checked the markers before winter." "I know. I'll check them at Ashvale." He went still. "That's not a yes. That's... I need to see what it is first, what it means. Whether there's a version of it that makes sense for both of us, and not just one." "That's fair. It might not work. I know. You're going to have to learn things you don't know yet, about what it means to hold a territory, about councils and bloodlines and all of it. You're going to be bad at it at first. I know that too. And you're going to have to learn how to talk to him." Ronan looked at the river, one thing at a time. She stood up, brushed gravel off her coat, looked down at him. He's waiting. Ronan stood. He was taller than her now. Had been for 2 years, something that had happened the same way everything happened between them, gradually and then suddenly. He looked down at her with that expression she'd finally translated in the shelter 3 days ago. "Vesper. Don't. I haven't said anything yet. You were about to say something that would make this harder than it needs to be." He looked at her for a moment. Then, "Yeah. Probably." She turned toward the shelf. Started climbing. Behind her, she heard him follow. Above them, at the edge of the ravine, Aldis Ashvale stood waiting with the patience of a man who had tracked a mark for 11 days across 4 territories, and was not, in the end, leaving without his son. He watched the girl climb first. Watched the way she moved, sure-footed, no wasted motion. The particular efficiency of someone who had learned this terrain the hard way and made it her own. Then, he watched his son follow her up. Something settled in his face. Not softening. Not quite. But something. He said nothing. He didn't need to. "That's where I'll leave them. 2 wolves and a king at the edge of a ravine in Karenmore, with the morning coming in cold and clear over the ridge. The pack that chased the white wolf into the abyss never found out what happened next. But you did. I'll see you next time."